Hello everyone, I am back again with another video for you. This one is a little bit different though. This is the first of a series. Many of you know that I am a minister and I'm a mommy and I'm a wife and a number of other things, educator, other things. But one of the things that is nearest and dearest to my heart is that I am a writer and I've been an author for several years. After I was in an auto accident some years ago, I was told that I would not be the person that I was prior to that accident. It was actually the thing that took me out of the classroom, and it took me a very long time to get myself back together. They said that I probably wouldn't be able to write anymore. I wouldn't be able to go into the classroom again. A number of other things that I would not be able to do. And so writing for me is a gift from God. I know that this is something that He had blessed me with. And so I had a personal challenge that I presented to myself. And although I had written some books before, I wanted to prove that I would at least get most of what I was back before the accident. And so I started writing this book, Mirage. And this book, again, it was a challenge to myself that I wanted to be able to write a book in 30 days to prove that I was on my way back. It hasn't been easy. It hasn't been without challenges, but this has been my favorite book just because it is so personal to me. It's so near and dear to my heart. So I thought I would like to share it with all of you. So again, this is the first video and I'll share with you chapter 1, and I'll come back with more videos sharing a chapter of Mirage until we are done with it. This and all of my books are available on Amazon and other online retailers, and there are some smaller stores around locally though that have the books there, but Amazon has been easier for me to keep track of what's going on. So I want to share with you Mirage and just about the book. It says, how many are passing and don't even know it? Laurel Dixon had it all. She's a Caucasian woman living the American dream, or so she thinks. She has a successful career in a world where women are expected to be home and stay silent. She is a proponent for equal rights and has finally given birth to her first child after years of failed pregnancies. What will happen when Laurel discovers in the most unwelcome way that her entire life has been only a mirage? Mirage is dedicated to my great-grandmother, Leora Corrine Lockhart. Thank you for enduring and not giving up. Thank you for the legacy you've left for me and each of your descendants. Thank you for your joys, your sorrows, your prayers, your blood, and your strength. I promise to live the life you were unable to live and to ensure that you are not forgotten. And this is my great-grandma, Leora Corrine Lockhart. I wonder what it's like to be alive, Sadira pondered in whimsical melancholy, as she straightened her gray dress, tightened the red and white checkered apron around her waist, and smoothed the tousled hairs upon her head. It was a true revelation for her to come to the understanding that life was not only a quickening of limbs and an unremitting heartbeat. She determined that living, really being alive, was found in the kindliness that comes from reciprocal love. It was a blissful memory that could be found in a sugary forehead kiss from Mama while she squeezed too tight. It was falling asleep on Daddy's lap within the confines of his protective embrace, or the security of family and friends and planning a future. These were things that she had witnessed in the white families that claimed to own her. They were things that she was not allowed to experience in the country that held her and didn't recognize her as human. Her thoughts were interrupted when the mistress entered. The portrait of a Southern belle, Elizabeth Avery, genially acknowledged her house girl. Sadie, whatever that is you're preparing smells simply delicious. Why, thank you, ma'am. It's chicken and dumplings, Johnny cakes, and pecan pie, Sadira answered nervously, manufacturing a smile through swollen lips. It'll be on the table right at 4 o'clock, like always. You're so efficient, Sadie. I just don't know what we'd do without you. Sadira had come to love and respect Elizabeth, and she tried her best to overlook the lack of respect that her mistress showed in addressing her. There were a plethora of annoyances to which Sadira had learned to adapt over time, but being called Sadie wasn't one of them. Her mother, AC, had chosen her name for a very specific reason, and she wanted to hold on to every fragment of the one who had given her life, as well as the culture from which she came. She recalled so well the numerous times her mother shared with her the story of how she had received her name. Sidira meant lotus tree. The story from AC's home was that a group of people called Mamluki had been captured and forced to build an empire for their oppressors. Incessantly, they longed for their homes and loved ones, but they knew they could never return. Their families would no longer respect them because they allowed themselves to be captured, so they would not be accepted in their village again. One day, while working in the Sambaya Mountains, they came across a tree with leaves and flowers like they had never seen before. They saw rich, plump fruits on this tree and could not resist tasting the fruit. When the first few ate of the tree, the others witnessed them becoming extremely drowsy. By the time they returned to the camp for the night, the people did not remember that they wanted to return home. They had forgotten all of their family and friends. Upon seeing this and no longer wanting to be in pain, the rest of the Mamluki found the tree and they too took their fill of the fruit. It took many years for Sidira to understand her mother's story, but since the day she was taken away from her and her siblings, she understood very well. Her mother wanted badly to discover her own lotus fruit, and now Sidira yearned for a bite of the mythical yield as well. She yearned for normalcy and a place to call home. Recovering from transitory angst, Sidira nodded her head toward Elizabeth with humble appreciation for the compliment on her cooking, all the while concealing eyes half veiled by slumberous tears. Elizabeth, a petite, plain-looking, raven-haired woman, was the first lady of Delta Grove Sugar Plantation. Her extended oval face always remained oddly pale despite the intense Arkansas sun, and the bangs she donned affected an unvarying childlike quality. What she lacked in beauty, she more than made up for in character. She was a kind, good-hearted woman who treated her servants well and who inwardly despised slavery. She knew that this institution blew harsh winds that sized each doctrine of Christianity. Her only recourse to her husband's insistence of keeping others enslaved was to treat them as she would her own family. She made sure that they were well clothed and fed, that they received sufficient rest, and that they were never treated harshly whenever she was present to intervene. Since her marriage to Harlan Avery, Elizabeth lived a life of privilege, far removed from the near destitute existence that had once been hers. This, however, was the only benefit to an otherwise maladjusted marriage. She was an intelligent and industrious young woman who was active in household affairs. At any given moment, she could be found alongside the house servants, sewing, knitting, weaving, and even caring for their children as they worked. For her, minding the children was the solace and stay she needed as a woman unable to bear offspring of her own. Sidira sampled from the pot on the stove, hoping she hadn't added too much seasoning. She tasted hastily, disregarding her wounded mouth. The salt burned her engorged cut lips, and she was swiftly reminded of the blow that her master had given her only moments before the encounter with Mistress Avery. She couldn't remember 10 days that had passed in as many years that she had not been abused by Elizabeth's husband in one way or another. Since the day she first arrived at Delta Grove, she sensed that any semblance of happiness was behind her. It was in an auction room in Franklin, Kentucky, on a sweltering day in July 1843, that she first set eyes on her future owner. She, her mother, and her 14-year-old brother, Diallo, were removed from the horse stall where they and other slaves were held until the auction began that day. Sidira was one of 9 children. She was sandwiched between 4 older brothers and 4 younger than she, who had all been born on Coffee Tree Plantation, the only place she had ever lived. Even her mother had lived there most of her life. Azzy was sold to the owner of Coffee Tree when she was the same age as Diallo, having been kidnapped from her home in Dakar, Senegal. She was a very proud woman who retained and taught her children the customs and traditions of the Wolof tribe. She shared with them memories of her parents, describing her mother, who was Ashanti, but embraced many of the Wolof customs when she married. Although it was a great taboo for each of them to marry outside of their respective tribes, they were able to blend without much resistance from either family. She quickly learned the Wolof language and wore beautiful traditional blue dresses and head wraps. She integrated seamlessly into the family but did not adopt her husband's religion. Instead, she retained her own Christian beliefs and raised her children as Christians. AC shared that her father, a tribal priest and griot, always looked so regal in his bao robes. He donned amulets and charms around his neck, and he taught them the customs of folk Islam. He told AC and her brothers and sisters that their mother never worked the fields while pregnant. He taught his boys that they were to follow this tradition when they took wives of their own. Wolof belief was that a man never allowed a pregnant woman to work in the fields because the harvest would be compromised and the yield would be undersized. He also told them that each of the children had slept with a knife placed near their heads when they were infants in order to ward off evil spirits and keep them safe. His children loved to gather at his feet and listen to the stories he shared about their African history and way of life. They were proud to be his children, and they each admired his powerful and majestic presence. He commanded respect with just his potent stature, and he was cherished amongst his tribe. AC inherited her father's stately appearance. She seemed the essence of an African princess. She was tall and solid with high cheekbones and a keen nose. Her face was framed by jet black braids that flowed to her waist, and her flawless ebony-colored skin was accented by a burnished red undertone. She was stunning, and everyone noticed it. As soon as she began her tenure at Coffee Tree, her master made it clear to each of the males on the land that AC was his and his alone. As a result, he had fathered all of her children, and although extremely rare and very much frowned upon, he acknowledged the children as his own. He was good to them and promised AC that she and each of his offspring would be granted their freedom upon his death. Unfortunately, he gave AC her manumission papers when the fifth child was born, but only included his wishes in regard to the children and a letter written to his wife. She took this as her only chance at vindication. For years, she stood idly by while her husband created a second family with a slave woman. Her revenge was to promptly do away with her husband's letter. She then made preparations for the entire family to be sold. His wife never knew that AC had been given her manumission documents, but in this case it mattered not. When AC became aware that they would all be sold, she discarded the papers. She held on to the hope that she and her young would be sold to one plantation and remain a family unit. Freedom would mean nothing to her if she lived emancipated while her children were still enslaved. 7 of her 9 had been sold the day before. Now, at the start of the second auction, only 2 were left. The 3 stood hand in hand, terrified that they would now be separated also. Aroused from her thoughts, Sadira was grabbed by the elbow, pushed up the stairs, and positioned in the middle of the auction block. Trembling, she allowed her eyes to briefly glance over the room, and there he was. His stony gait permeated her entire being, and she immediately dropped her eyes to escape the stare. Never had anyone instilled this kind of fear in her with just a look. Time seemed to have stopped around her, yet she could hear the muffled sound of auction chants as if afar off. Good men in old Virginia, we have here for your consideration Sadira, chattel number 7 in our catalog. She's a fine young mulatto darky of 16 years. Suddenly there were several men around her, including the one who had caught her glimpse moments before. They took turns pulling her mouth open, examining her teeth. They pinched her arms and legs and thumped her on the hips to study her muscle tone. They instructed her to walk to and fro across the stage to check for agility and for any sign of lameness. Unaffected and undaunted by the distress of Sadira or any of the other men and women being appraised like inanimate produce, the auctioneer continued. We start at $600. 600 bid, now 7. Will you give me 7? 700, now 8. We're at 8. Will you give me 9? This continued until at $1,200 the auctioneer slurred. Going once, going twice. She's sold to Mr. Harlan Avery, Delta Grove Sugar Plantation, Little Rock, Arkansas. Sounds of clapping and laughter filled the air, and Mr. Avery was lauded with pats on the back as he walked through the crowd. Conversely, Sadira's spirit collapsed into a dreary and hysterical depression when she witnessed both her mother and brother endure their own inspections, bidding, and ultimate sale to separate plantation owners. And that was it. Owing to greed, wickedness, and an erroneous sense of supremacy among landowners, their family was eternally shattered. Neither she nor her brothers would ever know any nieces and nephews. Her mother would never see any grandchildren. They would have no way of knowing each other's fate. She would never wake up early on Saturday mornings and walk through the woods picking and sampling ripe, robust dock leaves. She would never again taste the sweetness of her mother's honey blueberry jam. They were being robbed of the only love they had ever felt. They were being taken from the only home they had ever known. Far beyond the destruction of their immediate family, there was no way for these to know the long-standing effects of what would become the Atlantic slave trade. After their forefathers were kidnapped from their original African tribes, innumerable parents, children, and siblings were bought and sold as property throughout the South. Those of African descent in the United States, Cuba, Trinidad, the Dominican Republic, and the like would be forever disjointed. They would have no way to ever truly trace their blood relatives. Even more atrocious, this would be their reality due to no fault of their own. There would be no Ellis Island experience for them, no anticipated migration to America to realize the consummate dream. They would have no way of knowing that, to the contrary, for centuries to come, daily life would be an uninterrupted nightmare. Sadira and her descendants would be captives in a virtual prison built for their entire race in the land of the free. They would be incessantly browbeaten by cowards in the home of the brave. At auction's end, Sadira saw her mother's eyes dilated with pain and fear, while her own danced with malice. She looked at Diallo, her brother and best friend, and saw the angry blood that burned in his face. This was all too much to process. Cloaked with unutterable sorrows, Sadira, her mother and brother, bid each other a wordless yet mournful farewell. At that point, they were ripped from each other's embrace and thrown mercilessly into separate wagons. When her insides could no longer hold the immensity of raging anguish, Azy fell to her knees and bellowed agonizingly, "Bebe ninyun, my children, balma, nabnala bebe ninyun." With this, both Sadira and Diallo were struck a final emotive blow. Their mother had never used these words with them before. Their only times of separation had been during the daytime hours when they were each working around the plantation. Every morning she would kiss her children and with smiling eyes bid them, "Legi, legi," which simply meant, "See you very soon." The word she now cried meant a dreadfully definite goodbye, with absolutely no expectation of reunion. She cried from the depths of her reins, "Be ninyun, my children, baalma, nab na la be ninyun." This meant goodbye, my children. I'm sorry. I love you. Goodbye. They each knew that this would be their final exchange and that they would never see each other again. That was chapter 1 of Mirage. Stay tuned in the next week or so for chapter 2 and for the following chapters until we finish the complete book. And in the meantime, it is available, as I said, on Amazon in paperback, in Kindle form, as well as on audiobook in Audible. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please subscribe to the channel if you like it. Like this video, and I'll be back with more. Thanks again. See you soon.